to implement the middleware design pattern, we'll generate an app using Vite.js. Simply go to vite.js.dev, get started, and from here you can create an app simply by using the npm create vite at latest. Now inside our usual sandbox where we create all our proof of concepts, let's simply press on Ctrl Shift and open a PowerShell, but you could use any terminal. From here you can paste the command, which will allow you to create a new project. Do you want to proceed? Yeah. Name of your project. Let's just name it middleware pattern. We want to generate a vanilla project, vanilla JavaScript or TypeScript. Let's go for JavaScript. And then we just have to cd into middleware pattern, npm install, npm run dev. So I'd rather open Visual Studio Code. From here, terminal, new terminal. So we can npm install, as it was mentioned. It should be very fast. And npm run dev to see the app we have with its own server already configured. And if we command click or control click, you can see you have this app. Let's open the developer tools. We have an app. Now, what do we want? We want to create a logger, a simple logger that will be able to accept different plugins. So the logic behind the middleware pattern is that you can create very light apps and then allow users to provide plugins. At first, what do we want? We want to get rid of these logos. We don't want this inside this div with an ID of app. So we can replace it with just this text of middleware pattern. We can see that we don't need this JavaScript logo, nor do we need this step counter. And we can Shift Alt F to format. So you see now we just have this and it's perfect. We said we wanted to create a logger. Let's create this logger.js file. And this will be just a regular class that we will export so we can import it inside main.js. So we export by default a class that we decide to name logger. And that's a class that will allow us to log message at first, just to make sure that it works, and we'll simply console.log this message. So now we can create an instance of a logger using new and logger, so it should be auto imported. Let's move it below this. So now we can see that you have a logger that has a log method that can simply log something. So now you can see it logs hey. Super simple app. But what we want now this app to be able to do is to accept different plugins that could add, for example, a timestamp to your message. Let's start with this one. So to allow using the middleware pattern this logger app to receive plugins, we need to create a middleware manager. A middleware manager is simply another class that we can name login middleware manager .js. As we need to import it, it will be imported inside logger.js. We need to use the export keyword. We want a default export, and this is going to be a class that is also going to be named logging middleware manager. Actually, it would be better to use an uppercase L. So now we have this class, and this class, through its constructor, we'll make two arrays available. One for plugins you want to use in the order in which they would be added. And another one, it's not mandatory, but just to show that if you wanted to, you could have a way to use your middlewares in the order in which they arrived, or for example, to use them if you are creating this for an application like Express that would handle HTTP requests. So this one could be applied on input requests, and this one on responses. So imagine whatever you want, as long as this is a way to illustrate that you can have two different containers for your plugins. Now we need a way to add plugins to this middleware manager. Consider that this middleware manager is like a production line, and that every time you add a middleware, this is the equivalent of having this articulated arm. So you want to add this functionality, then this functionality, then this functionality. So we will use to add a new arm. Let's call them arms. So this is the responsibility of use to allow us to add a middleware. So use expects a middleware, and we want to detect on which direction we want to go. For example, let's go from left to right or from right to left. So here we test if this middleware has a direction property that is in, or you could have used left or right, it doesn't matter, but I went for in. In this case, we add it to the in array. So we would add it after everything that is already inside this array. So we use the spread operator. And after everything that is inside in, we add this current middleware. And if the middleware direction is out, you could have used again left and right, for example, but I decided to go for in and out. Then you guessed it, you would add it to this middleware. And then we would first add the middleware and then everything that was already inside the out array. Which means that now you can go back to where you used this logger, and let's imagine that you would like to add a middleware using use. So that means we also need to have a use method here that will itself call. So inside our wrap, we also have a use function, and it will use an instance of the middleware. So we can use its use method. So let's add a constructor here that will expect a login middleware manager, and that will make it available to the instance of logger. Let's name it login mgr, which will be this login middleware manager. We also want to keep all the messages inside an array. So now when here the user of our logger will want to add a middleware, it'll be able to do so by using logger.use that expects a middleware. And this middleware will itself use the use method of the login manager. So now we need a middleware. So let's create a middleware which responsibility will be to add a timestamp to a message. So we can name this one use timestamp.js. And this timestamp will simply be a function that will return an object that will provide two properties. The one that will allow to know the direction in which our middleware should go. So it would be in or out. Let's go for in. And it would have an execute. Every middleware in our system should have an execute function that takes a message, and that would add to this message that we decide to name timestamp. That will simply be a new date in the ISO string format, and then you would return the message. So anybody who would want to add a middleware we'll simply have to return an object, a function that returns an object that has a direction, that is a string of in or out, and an execute function that takes a message and does something to this message. Here, it simply adds a timestamp, and it returns the message that has been augmented with this timestamp. Which means that now, using use, we can add this middleware. Here, it's just as if we decided to add this middleware here. So imagine that at first it's empty, then you add your first middleware, then another one, and another one. Simply by using use, you can add this middleware to the Middleware Manager. So we can see it's imported from the file at the same level, this file, and you simply have to call it. So when you call it, use timestamps is executed, and what does it do? It simply returns this object. This object is passed to use, and logger has this use method that expects a middleware and that passes it to the login manager. That also has a use method here that decides if it should add this middleware to the in array or to the out array. So now, inside the logger, the log method will not simply now console.log the message. It will instead create an object that we decide to name data, simply because you remember our plugins accept an object. You see, because you can add different properties. So it expects an object, so we provide an object here. So now, when we receive a message, we add a text property to our object, which now has this text property that will be the message. Here in our case it would be hey, so we would receive hey, and hey would become the value of this text property. We would save this message. We don't have a database, so let's just save it into this messages array. So we would take everything that is, would copy everything that is already inside messages using the spread operator, and then we would use the data right after it. And then we would use our login middleware manager, and we needed to have a way to execute every function that is inside in or inside out. So remember that this login middleware manager now contains inside this in array a single object. But then if you decided to use another plugin that would do something else, for example, that would allow to determine the importance of a message, we will create it in a moment. You could have a use importance plugin that you would pass to use also, which would mean that then you would have another object, because every plugin simply returns an object that has a direction and an execute function that does what the plugin is expected to do. So you need a way to go through every object of this array and then call its execute function. So this one is easy to do because it's simply a for loop that needs to be called. So let's call it from the execute middleware function, and as the name implies, it will simply execute every middleware that was passed to the array, so it will be middlewares. And this function will be used on a message. So we'll name this one data. On this specific data, we want to use this middleware, then this middleware, then if there is a third one, this middleware. So we would use the execute function of this object that contains an execute function, then the execute function of this other one, then the execute function of this user object, because remember, what is returned by a middleware is simply an object. We return this object that contains a direction property and an execute function. So we want to execute this execute function that lives inside this object returned by any of our middleware. So we need to store the current new version of our data. So the past data that starts with null, meaning that at first, imagine that this middleware would be used to take your message and make it uppercase. So you would go through this middleware that would return your message in an uppercase form. Then you would pass the uppercase message to this middleware that maybe would encrypt your message. So you would call encrypt. So now it would be uppercase and encrypted. Then you would pass it to another middleware. So that's why you need to preserve the last state of your message. So we just have to go through every middleware. So let's name it here mtw. That sits inside the in array. So we store inside the parse data variable the result of calling the execute function of the middleware, and we pass it our message. And let's just console.log here to make sure, because we will soon add a second middleware to make sure that this is called twice, one for every middleware that is inside in. So here we would say that we're inside this function, and this is what our parsed data looks like. And after that, after we've gone through every middleware and that we executed using execute, so we executed every execute function, then we can return the result. So let's see if this works. We have an error on line 15. Maybe it's an old one. Let's refresh. It's not an old one, so it's a current one on line 15. Cannot read properties of undefined. Logger line 15. Oh yeah, because we didn't pass here an instance of a middleware manager. Login middleware manager. So this fixed the error. But it's still not used. You see, we never call the execute function of our middleware. It's because we haven't called our execute middlewares function. And we should do it from where? From this log function. Because here when you call log and we pass this hey message, we forgot to call execute middlewares. So now, let's see why this doesn't work. Oh, it's simply because I forgot to use the log method. This is ridiculous. So if I decide to log out that log, so let's add after the plugin was added. So we can see that we have one middleware, which is good. Then when we decide here, we decide to use this middleware, you see this time we have something in our array. So let's get inside it. It goes inside it, it executes, it passes after the plugin was added. So it will go inside the execute function. It will add a timestamp property. Now message has a timestamp property, and return the message that has a text and a timestamp. Oh, it looks good. So now if you look inside your console, you can see that you have your message that contains a text property and a timestamp. So let's add another middleware that we will decide to name importance.js. And what should this one do? Remember, a middleware is simply a function that returns an object that has a direction property and an execute function. So let's again create a function that will export, which name is going to be useImportance. So we have to return an object that has a direction property and an execute function that expects a message. And this time, what should it do? It will simply test if, and you see inside execute you can put whatever you want to make whatever change you want your message to be affected by. So we want to check if the text property of the message object, if it contains the word urgent. So we'll be careful and we will convert to lowercase, and we want to see if it contains, so we use includes if the message includes the word urgent, and if it does, we'll add to the message a property of severity. We decide to name this one like that, severity, and we would add important. And also let's add another test. So you could use also regex if you want, a regular expression. Let's test if the text also to lowercase, if this text includes the word confidential, then you would add a severity of simply secret, and then we can return the message. So if you compare, can you see the pattern? Anyone who wants now to add a new functionality to your logger app simply has to create a function that returns an object that has a direction property that we don't even use because it would be such a long video, but you see we would put everything inside in, but just to show that you could have different ways to store your middlewares. And most important is this execute function that takes a message and does something to it. So here it simply adds a timestamp always, and here it conditionally adds a severity, or a severity actually of important or of secret, and then we return the message. Don't forget to return it. Here we return it after the ifs, because maybe it will never enter the ifs if there is no urgent word nor confidential word, but there it will always receive a timestamp, so we'll return just below. So now you know the drill. To add a new plugin, we simply use the use function. Its responsibility is to add, you see, a new arm, I should say, to this production line. So let's say this one is use timestamp, and now we add this new arm of use importance. So we simply have to use this use importance plugin. So if we wanted to, we could put all the plugins together. Here are our premier plugins. I don't know why I use actually I know, because it's because of React. I'm so used to create custom hooks that start with use, but you don't have to name your middleware use. You could use it, you could name your plugin whatever you want. So now if we use log again with a message of urgent, go grab a beer, and another one, oh, let's start with this one already. So if you go back, you can see that this one is your hey message. We don't care about it right now. We can see that inside in we don't have a plugin yet, so now we have after the plugin was added, which means that in this in we have the first plugin to add a timestamp. Now here we have our second plugin, which means that now we should have two plugins with an execute function inside each. We execute the first time, now we have a text and a timestamp, and the second time we will also have a severity because there is this urgent word. And you see now the pass data has a severity of important. We have, after the plugin was added, urgent grab a beer with a timestamp, and now we have a timestamp and a severity. And now, just for the sake of really making sure that you understood how to create a plugin, let's create another plugin that will be used to reverse the message. So you know that a plugin is simply a function that we export. We decided to name this one use reverse. And remember that a plugin in our system is just an object that we return that contains a direction property of in and an execute function. This one is very important, that expects a message and does something to this message. So to reverse a message, you know how we do this in JavaScript. You simply add a reverse property to this message, and to reverse a string, this is a well-known trick. You take the text, you split it on an empty string, which means we're gonna split it on every, let me show you here. Let's say you have hey. If you split it using an empty string, you will end up with an array containing 3 letters because here we have 3 letters. So now that you have an array, you can reverse the array. So you see now it's reversed. You have first Y, then E, then H. But you don't want to return an array, you want to return a string. So you simply have to join. So you'll have a string again, and you join also on an empty string. So now, as a result, you have the string reversed. And it works also with a longer string like, hey guys. So same thing, you split on the empty string, you reverse, you join on an empty string. So, hey guys. So we'll do exactly that. We can copy it from here. So on our text, what do we want to do? We want to split an empty string, then reverse, then join. And we return the message. Which means now, if you want the ability to see your string, log your string, and a reverse version on it, you simply have to use the use function that allows to add to your Middleware Manager a new plugin. What plugin you want to add? This new plugin we've just added, this the use reverse. Use reverse. We execute it because by executing it, we return here. We receive this object because it's returned here. And we pass the object to this use method. This use method receives the middleware and calls the Middleware Manager to add this middleware. As a result, now this in property has an array of 3 objects that each contain a function. You know what? I will add also a name property, so we would see in the console which one is being used when we loop over them. So this one will be use importance. This one is use timestamp. Yeah, this one is use reverse. So it will make it easier to see in the console what plugin is being passed. After having used use reverse, let's use the log function of our logger, and this time we want to log. How cool is that? So now we can see that you have an object that has a text, a timestamp, and a reversed string. This is awesome. And if you go to your login manager, and if we add here a debugger, you will see that at first for hey we don't care, so we go ahead. Then for after the plugin was added, which plugin is it talking about? So it's the use timestamp. So that's it. See, it's convenient now. We know which plugin we are talking about. Let's go ahead. This time, what do we have inside in? We have the use timestamp and use importance. And the third time, what do we have? We have use timestamp, use importance, and use reverse, which means that this for of loop will be used 3 times, which means that we will call the execute function of the use timestamp, then the execute function of use importance, then the execute function of use reverse. To make sure this is what is going to happen, let's add a breakpoint here, and let's go there. So you see at first parse data is null, then it's how cool is that with a timestamp? Why does it have a timestamp first? Because remember, we use timestamp before, then it will try to use importance. Second time we're using the use importance. It will add nothing because there is no important word inside it. If you remember, we just add things if we have urgent or confidential. So nothing will change. And the last time what middleware is used, it's the use reverse. So now the parsed data simply has a timestamp and a text. And if we go ahead, now it has also a reversed property with a reversed text. And now we can return the result. Just like that. So I can remove the debugger. And you can see the final result. And to see it better, let's add one last thing. Remember that inside logger here, we have this messages array in which we save a message as a value of this text property, and we add it to these messages. So to make our life easier, we can add a showMessages function that, as you probably guessed it, will simply return the messages. So now we can call the showMessages from the logger. Oh yeah, I forgot that this returns an array of messages, so let's just retrieve the messages and console.log these messages. So now you can see we have 4 messages. The first one is hey. Then after we added the plugin that allows to add a timestamp, you see now we have a timestamp. Then we added another plugin that allows to add a severity property. So as there is the urgent word here, it added a severity of important, which is cool because then when you have all your messages stored, you can very quickly filter by severity, for example. And then we have, after having added the use reverse plugin, you see we have the text itself, the timestamp, and reversed. We don't have a severity because it doesn't contain urgent nor confidential, but if we had confidential, for example, what are we looking for inside this one? The confidential keyword. So let's say, yeah, confidential. So then we would have the text, a timestamp, a severity of secret, because we have the confidential word there, and a reversed version of it. So this middleware pattern is very important because it allows you to have a very limited app that is very minimal and then adds lots of functionalities. We have this logger that simply has the log and show message function, and then every time we want to use extra functionality, we simply have to create middlewares and to add them to the Middleware Manager using the use method. That consists in adding all these objects to an array, and then when you want to execute the middleware, we decided to execute it here from the log function. We simply use execute middleware, and what does it do? It simply goes through all the objects that we stored inside this array, and we know that every middleware has an execute function that expects a message. So we are sure that, you see, we have here an execute function, here an execute function, and here an execute function. And we call this function one after the other.